He hit her before she even finished her sentence. No warning, no hesitation. Sheriff Mason Callahan swung his arm wide and drove his fist straight into Evelyn Harper's cheekbone with the weight of a man who believed he would never answer for anything he did. The sound was sharp and hollow, like someone slamming a wooden board against stone. And the crowd at the Oakidge flea market froze as if the morning air itself had stopped moving. Evelyn stumbled once, her old bicycle tipping beside her, and then she fell hard, the back of her skull cracking against the iron pole of a vendor stall. The blood came fast, pooling, warm and dark, as if her life had been waiting just beneath the surface for a reason to leave. Before diving into this story, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and give me a like to support these true stories being told. Thank you. It had been an ordinary morning for her, or as ordinary as life in Oakidge allowed these days. She had pedaled slowly from her small home on the hill, her bicycle tires whispering over the cracked road. In the basket were 3 eggs wrapped carefully in cloth, a loaf of yesterday's bread, and a small bundle of greens she had cut from her own yard. Evelyn Harper, 74 years old, had lived through war zones and dying fields, had held young men as they bled out under the sound of distant mortars, had buried a husband who never came home from the factory, and had raised a son who became something the country whispered about in classified rooms. But none of that mattered here. To Sheriff Mason Mace Callahan, all he saw was an old black woman who did not look afraid of him. And that was enough. Mace had barreled into the market moments earlier in his unmarked F-150, tires skidding, the smell of alcohol still on him from the night before. Vendors jumped aside as he clipped a table of used books and sent a crate of peaches rolling across the dirt. His eyes were bloodshot, lids heavy, jaw clenched like a man who woke angry and needed somewhere to put it. Evelyn did not move out of his way fast enough. Or perhaps she did. Perhaps it would not have mattered. She looked up at him with a tired dignity, a patience worn into her bones, and said only, "Good morning, Sheriff." But she did not say sir. And in that twisted place behind his ribs, where power rotted into pride, he took it as a challenge. Jada Monroe was standing 20 yards away, a thin 16-year-old with a cracked phone screen and a stomach that still remembered the time Mace had grabbed her by the hair behind the gas station last year. She had never wanted to see him again. But when she saw Evelyn's bike fall, her hands moved on their own, raising the phone, recording, her breath already shaking, her heart pounded as she zoomed in. She didn't know she was recording history. She only knew someone had to. Deputy Riley Boone was leaning against a patrol truck near the entrance, finishing a cigarette, watching everything with dead eyes. He did not step forward. He had not stepped forward the last 7 times either. Inside him was a fear that had become habit, a fear that sat beside guilt and drank its coffee every morning. He took another slow drag, watching the blood spread, and told himself the same lie he always told: "I didn't do it." But he stayed silent, and silence, here, was the same as swinging the fist. Mace grabbed Evelyn's basket from the ground, eggs broken, bread crushed, greens scattered, and threw it against the stall as if even the reminder of her life offended him. "I told you," he slurred, voice thick. "You look at me when I speak. You call me sir. This is my land." His words tumbled with the arrogance of a man who had never once been forced to consider he might face consequence. The crowd stared. No one moved. Some were white and afraid. Some were black and used to fear wearing a badge. Some were too shocked to breathe. Evelyn lay still, chest rising only slightly, the old scar on her temple, the one she got in Da Nang when the field hospital roof collapsed, caught a ray of morning light. Dr. Lila Chen would later say the hemorrhage had already begun then, blood pressing inside her skull like a tightening fist. But right now, she simply looked peaceful, like someone resting after a long walk. Jada took one half step closer, phone still recording, trying not to sob. Mace turned toward her. Their eyes met. She saw the moment he recognized her. His face twisted. He strode forward, snatched the phone from her hands, and slammed it to the ground. "You never learn," he growled. Then he kicked her in the stomach, knocking the wind from her, sending her to her knees. She curled forward, gasping, hands shaking. But even through tears, she reached for the shattered phone, because she knew sometimes truth only lived if someone held on to it. Evelyn did not speak. She did not plead. She had never begged in her life, even unconscious. Her face held the quiet stubbornness of someone who had seen the worst men could do and still believed in something beyond them, somewhere far away. Her son was briefing a small strike team for a classified operation in a desert no one would name aloud. Somewhere. His comms officer would soon receive an alert that would freeze him in place. But here, on the cracked ground of the Oakidge flea market, surrounded by the smell of spilled peaches and dust and gasoline, the story had already begun, and every person present would remember the sound of that first strike, the sound of power used on the defenseless, the sound that would echo through a church basement, a bar recording, a courthouse in Atlanta, and the quiet front porch where a mother would one day sit again, teaching children to read. The spark that would burn through the whole town had just been lit. When they brought Evelyn into Oakidge General Hospital at 8:02 a.m., the automatic doors struggled open as if even the building understood the weight of what was happening. Dr. Lila Chen met the gurney halfway down the hall, her eyes sharp and steady, the kind of eyes that had seen too many people at the threshold between here and gone. Evelyn's left temple was swollen, blood matted in her white hair, her breathing shallow, slow, irregular. The monitor flickered with quiet beeps that sounded too far apart. Glasgow score 3 out of 15. That meant a coma. That meant the kind of injury where families prayed. But doctors hoped quietly that the patient would not suffer long. Lila did not say any of that out loud. She simply placed her hand on Evelyn's shoulder and said, with a calm rooted somewhere deep inside her, "You're safe now. I've got you." But safety was a word that did not belong in Oakidge that morning. Not yet. The police report arrived before the scan results did. Deputy Riley Boone walked into the ER with the blank expression of a man who had rehearsed a lie until it felt like memory. He handed the document to the triage nurse, who passed it on to Lila. Elderly female fell while resisting arrest. It read, "Impact sustained during attempted detainment. No mention of a closed fist. No mention of force. No mention of the blood on the sheriff's knuckles." Lila read the report twice, her jaw tightening. She had been in the ER long enough to know how words could be used to erase violence. She looked up at Riley, who would not meet her eyes. She didn't fall. Lila said quietly. Riley said nothing. He just rubbed the back of his neck, a small, nervous tick, and walked back toward the exit, each step sounding like it cost him too much and not enough at the same time. Meanwhile, 40 yards away in a supply room, 16-year-old Jada Monroe sat on a folded blanket, knees pulled to her chest, her breathing uneven. The shattered phone lay beside her, screen splintered, camera lens cracked clean across. She had managed to save roughly 70% of the footage before the police had sealed the hospital. Her hands shook not from pain, but from the weight of knowing she was now holding the only truth that mattered. She replayed the sound of the punch in her head again and again, the sharp, sickening impact. And she felt the same cold burn rise up in her chest every time. It was the same burn she felt a year ago when Mace had grabbed her behind the gas station and told her no one would believe her. But Evelyn had believed her. Evelyn had taken her inside, made her tea, touched the bruise on her cheek with the gentlest hand. "I know what fear can do to a girl," she had said, "but fear is not the end of you." So Jada recorded. Because Evelyn had once chosen to see her, in the dim light of St. Luke's Church. Pastor Isaiah Brooks lit a candle and placed it near the altar. The sanctuary smelled faintly of old wood and sorrow. The morning light coming through the stained glass windows seemed too soft for the world outside. Word had already spread across town. People whispered it at the grocery store, murmured it at the diner, spoke it in tight clusters on street corners. But whispering was all they could do. The police had begun circling the hospital, 2 cars parked at each entrance. Lights off, but presence unmistakable. Sheriff Callahan had made his move years ago, not just in force, but in fear. People learned to speak carefully in Oakidge, yet Pastor Isaiah had seen movements begin with less than this. He knelt, hands folded, and whispered a prayer for Evelyn, for Jada, for the town that had learned to flinch when it should have risen. Meanwhile, Tucker Malone stood behind the back bar of Rusty Jack's Tavern, his hands raw from scrubbing floors. He was 19, with a tiredness in his eyes that belonged to someone much older. Last night, he had heard Mace laughing at the end of the bar, slamming his glass down and bragging too loud. Her head sounded like a watermelon, Mace had said, and the men around him had laughed because laughing felt safer than not. Tucker's jaw had clenched. His fingers had tightened around his phone. He could have walked away. He could have kept quiet like everyone else had for years. But something in him had shifted. Some line crossed. He pressed record. Tonight. As he listened to the audio again, his stomach churned. He knew what happened to people who crossed men like Mace. His own ribs remembered, but he could not unhear what he had captured. He could not unknow it. By afternoon, the hospital had become a silent battleground. Officers lingered near the nurses' station. Their presence was heavy, watchful. Lila moved from room to room, her face calm, her voice even, her hands steady. But inside, she felt the tightening coil of something dangerous. She had seen the CT results. The hemorrhage was severe, but not hopeless. Evelyn needed transfer to a neurosurgical center, but when she requested ambulance clearance, the dispatcher hesitated. "Sheriff Callahan has restricted patient movement until further notice." Lila paused, her pulse loud in her ears. "This is not a discussion," she said, voice low but unwavering. "If we delay treatment, she may not survive. And if she dies because of your interference, I will put my name on every report and every hearing your department will ever face." The line went silent. 10 minutes later, the transfer was approved. That evening, Jada slipped out of the hospital through the back stairwell, clutching the damaged phone. She made her way to the church, where Pastor Isaiah opened the door before she could knock. He saw the way her shoulders trembled, and he said nothing. He simply wrapped her in an embrace and let her cry. When she was quiet again, they sat together at the old wooden table in the basement, light flickering from a single lamp. Jada placed the phone down. "I don't know if it's enough," she whispered. Isaiah touched her hand. "Truth does not need to be loud." He said, "It only needs to be seen." As night settled over Oakidge, the town held its breath. Some prayed, some hid, some waited. Tucker sat on the edge of his bed, headphones in, listening to the recorded laughter of the sheriff who believed himself untouchable. Jada lay awake in the church attic, replaying the video, frame by frame, refusing to look away. Lila stood at Evelyn's bedside, fingertips resting lightly on the back of the woman's hand, listening to the soft, steady beep of the heart monitor, and in a bunker beneath Fort Bragg. A silent alarm flashed across a classified screen, linking Evelyn M. Harper to a name spoken only by generals in closed rooms, a name that did not remain idle when the world broke someone he loved. The silence before the storm had begun. At 11:47 p.m., deep beneath Fort Bragg, in a reinforced concrete bunker known officially as Strategic Command Observation Layer C, though everyone simply called it the Pit, the watchtower system triggered an alert across a wall of dimly lit monitors. Rows of analysts sat in quiet focus, their faces lit blue and white by screens full of encrypted activity logs and intelligence feeds flowing from satellites, drone sweeps, and dark channels no map admitted existed. One notification cut through the usual noise. Civilian injury event. Evelyn M. Harper. Potential escalation risk. The name pulsed once, twice, then highlighted itself in red, linking to a secure personnel file marked Classified Orion Clearance. The officer on duty, a quiet analyst named Morgan Hale, frowned and leaned forward, expecting to see a retired soldier, maybe a former official. Instead, the file opened to an image of General Nathan J. Harper, commander of the program code-named Delta Phantom, a covert operations unit whose missions were not cataloged, whose members had no service records, and whose existence was something even senior officers would deny without blinking. The room's air shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Morgan tapped a key. A secure transmission request populated, not to the Pentagon, not to the White House, to Nathan himself. That alone said everything. Nathan was not stateside. He was half a world away in the Kandahar uplands, the wind sharp with dust and distance. He stood with 6 operatives in a circle of low rock, their equipment blacked out against the night, preparing to breach a remote compound where a weapons broker had been meeting with 2 men the world desperately needed to forget. The plan was timed to the second. The helicopter extraction window was narrow, their drone cover minimal. Every variable had been accounted for. Then his comm unit vibrated in that particular 3-pulse pattern reserved for only one system. He pressed the receiver to his ear, expecting an instruction change. Instead, he heard the clipped, almost apologetic tone of a watchtower relay operator. General Harper. Civilian incident. Oakidge, Georgia. Victim, Evelyn May Harper. The operator paused, a hesitation thick enough to feel severity critical, likely intentional harm, local enforcement involved. Nathan did not ask for details. He did not ask who. He only closed his eyes for a moment, as if steadying something inside him that wanted to fracture outward. Begin exfiltration protocol, he said quietly. His team did not question him. They had seen the shift in his face, the tightening around the mouth, the sudden stillness of the hands of a man who rarely shook. When the helicopter arrived, they left the mission unfinished. Another unit would be dispatched. War would continue without him. Some things did not wait, but Nathan did not take the helicopter back to base. He boarded something else, something that did not officially exist, the MV-33 Spectre, a stealth vertical lift aircraft used only for operations no one acknowledged. The craft rose into the desert air, vanished into darkness, and flew without transponder, without call sign, without record, inside the cockpit. Nathan sat alone, staring forward, back straight, jaw set. He did not think of his mother as a victim. He thought of her sitting on their porch in the afternoon light years ago, teaching him the sound of words by reading aloud from a worn book of poetry. He remembered her stitching a boy's gashed arm at a church shelter with hands that did not shake even once. He remembered her standing at his father's grave, her grief quieter than rain. And he thought, with the cold clarity of someone who had survived too many battlefields to believe in coincidence, that the sheriff had chosen the wrong woman, in the wrong town, on the wrong day. The Spectre reached Georgia under cover of pre-dawn cloud. He did not land at an airfield. He guided the aircraft low across pine forest stretches and touched down in a clearing behind an abandoned barn 12 miles outside Oakidge. He deactivated the craft, removed the black flight suit, and changed into plain clothing, a faded jacket, dark jeans, work boots worn at the soles. He looked like any tired man returning home, except his eyes. Anyone looking closely would have seen the kind of stillness found only in men who have carried the responsibility of deciding who lives and who does not. He began walking toward the town, moving through the trees, his steps steady, unhurried, like a shadow returning to a place that had once known him. He did not announce himself. He did not call the hospital. He did not call law enforcement. He did not alert the federal offices that technically reported to him. He simply walked. When he reached Oakidge General Hospital, he entered through the rear service entrance, moving past the laundry tiles and the hum of fluorescent lights. The night nurse glanced up at him, startled at first, then softened. Something in him made people fall quiet. He walked directly to Evelyn's room. Lila Chen had been sitting beside the bed, chart resting on her lap, exhaustion in the gentle slump of her shoulders. She looked up. For a moment, she simply observed him. She did not know his title. She did not know his unit. She did not need to. She recognized the grief held tightly inside the spine, held back because collapse was not an option, without a word. She nodded once and stepped aside. Nathan took the chair and sat beside his mother, placing his hand over hers. Her skin was cool, but her pulse still moved, faint but present. He leaned forward, not breaking, not trembling, only speaking softly, the way one speaks to someone who has never left them. "I'm here," he said. "I'm sorry I'm late." His voice held warmth and something harder beneath it. There were rooms in the world where men trembled at his orders. There were cities that changed course because of decisions he made in silence. But here, he was only a son. Down the hall. The elevator chimed. Agent Valeria Ortiz stepped out, a leather folder tucked under her arm. She had waited 3 years for clearance to move on Sheriff Callahan. 3 years of blocked warrants, vanished reports, mysteriously reassigned investigators. Tonight, she had received one line of instruction from a channel she did not even have clearance to know existed. Assist General Harper. No restrictions. She had not known what that meant until she saw him through the glass of the hospital hallway, sitting beside Evelyn's bed. She understood then that the investigation would no longer be buried. The sheriff's circle of protection would not hold. And Oakidge, a town that had grown used to swallowing its own screams, was about to be forced to speak, and somewhere across town, in a house that smelled of stale beer and dried sweat, Sheriff Mason Callahan slept with the contentment of a man convinced the world bent around him. He did not know that the ground had already shifted beneath his feet. He did not know a war had just arrived home. Nathan sat at his mother's bedside through the early morning hours, the low hum of the heart monitor steady and fragile like a thread holding 2 worlds together. He did not cry. He did not rage. He simply sat, one hand lightly resting over Evelyn's, as though his touch alone might remind her of the porch light that always stayed on for him when he was young, the soft whistle of the kettle at dusk, the warm smell of cornbread cooling on the stove. Dr. Lila Chen checked Evelyn's vitals quietly, understanding that grief had its own language and that some men carried grief the way others carried weapons, held close, hidden, but never out of reach. When the first gray light of dawn softened the hospital windows, Nathan stood and kissed his mother's forehead. Then he turned to Lila. "Keep her safe," he said. Lila nodded, and though she did not know what war looked like through his eyes, she understood that her task was now a front line of its own. He left the hospital without speaking to anyone else, moving through the corridors like a shadow that no one could stop. Outside. The morning air was cold enough to make the breath visible. Oakidge was waking up. Trucks rumbled past the diner. The steel mill smokestacks stood like broken monuments against the sky. Nathan walked the town's quiet streets, not as a soldier, but as someone studying a wound. The first place he went was St. Luke's Church, where Jada Monroe was still curled beneath a borrowed quilt in the choir loft, having barely slept. Pastor Isaiah had been awake long before sunrise, seated in the first pew, his hands clasped, his head lowered. When Nathan entered, Isaiah looked up, and in that instant, the pastor understood with a clarity that required no words who this man was. Jada stirred, blinking, her fingers searching instinctively for the shattered phone beside her. Nathan approached slowly. He knelt beside her so she did not have to look up at him. "You filmed what happened," he said softly. Jada nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to save it. Some of it is gone. I don't know if it's enough." Nathan held her gaze. "You were brave," he said. "You did not look away. That matters more than you know." She exhaled, the small release of a child who had been holding fear inside her ribs for too long. Next, he went to find Tucker Malone. The boy was in the abandoned garage behind the old feed store, hunched over a workbench, rewinding the audio recording for the 100th time. He did not hear Nathan enter. Tucker was lean, pale from worry, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the play button. Mace's voice crackled through cheap earbuds, thick with intoxicated cruelty. Her head sounded like a watermelon. Tucker flinched every time he heard it, like his body rejecting the very memory of laughter around violence. When he finally realized someone else was in the room, he jumped back, startled. Nathan raised his hands, palms open. "I'm not here to scare you." Tucker recognized him, not his face, which most people had never seen, but the stillness, the silence of someone who had walked through fire and didn't bother to speak of it. Tucker swallowed hard. "I didn't know what else to do." He said, "Nobody stops him." Nathan stepped closer, voice quiet but firm. "Someone will now?" Tucker looked down at the recorder. "It's all I got." Nathan nodded. "It's enough." Meanwhile, Sheriff Mason Callahan stood at the podium in front of the town courthouse, facing a local news camera and 3 reporters who had been called before breakfast. He wore his uniform pressed, his badge polished, his expression that familiar imitation of authority he had perfected over years. "It is my sad duty to inform this community," he said, voice smooth, "that an elderly woman suffered injuries while resisting lawful detainment yesterday morning." He paused, letting his words settle like dust. "We take no pleasure in using force, but the law applies to everyone. There was no mention of broken eggs, a bicycle tipped over, a fist thrown without cause. No mention of Jada, of the phone kicked across the dirt, no mention of the bruises forming on her ribs. But his tone carried the message he wanted. I am still the law here." Riley Boone stood behind him, face pale, eyes swollen from a night without sleep. When the press conference ended, Riley leaned in and whispered, voice weak, "Mace, this is going to come back on us." Mace smirked. "Only if you talk." It was not a threat. It was ownership. Nathan did not go to the courthouse. He knew power rarely announced itself through microphones. He instead went to the police station. He did not walk in through the front. He circled to the back, past the loading bay and the dumpsters, to the server room window. Most small-town stations were predictable. Outdated firewalls, underfunded IT, backups poorly maintained. Nathan worked in silence, his fingers moving over a compact device he carried for operations requiring quiet access. He tapped into the station's internal network within minutes. The files were exactly where he expected: incident logs, officer reports, patrol cam feeds, and a hidden directory labeled Archive 7, the one Riley had used to bury the others. 14 erased tapes, 14 assaults, 14 people who never saw justice. Nathan downloaded everything to a secure drive and then mirrored it to 3 encrypted backups stored in cloud servers that no one in Oakidge could ever reach. Not even with a court order. Truth had a way of surviving when protected correctly. At dusk, Nathan met with Agent Valeria Ortiz in a quiet hallway of the hospital. Ortiz had shed her blazer and tied her hair back, looking less like a federal agent and more like someone preparing for a long fight. "You understand what happens if we move too soon," she said. "He still has the department, the judges, the county board." Nathan's voice remained even. "The county isn't my concern. My mother is—" Ortiz studied his face. "And revenge?" Nathan held her gaze, unblinking. "Revenge is loud. Reckoning is quiet. I am here for reckoning." Ortiz nodded slowly. "Then we do this right. Evidence first. Witnesses protected. Federal jurisdiction established." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Jada and Tucker are already targets." Ortiz exhaled. "I'll get them safe tonight." And she would. She had waited too long for this moment to falter now. Across town. Mace Callahan sat in his kitchen, bottle half empty, boots kicked up, believing his world was still stable. But there was a shift in the air now, subtle but unmistakable. A son had come home. A system long buried was about to surface. And in hospital room 217, Evelyn Harper lay silent, her breath shallow, her spirit suspended between this world and the one beyond it, yet even unconscious. She remained what she had always been, a quiet force that would change everything around her simply by existing. The ghost had arrived, and Oakidge was no longer a town sleeping under fear. It was a fuse waiting for flame. The federal courthouse in Atlanta was colder than any battlefield Nathan had ever walked, not because of the air conditioning, but because truth here was stripped bare, placed under lights, and measured piece by piece. Judge Amara Singh presided from the bench, her posture straight, her presence quiet but immovable. The kind of authority that did not raise its voice because it never needed to. The courtroom was full. Reporters lined the back wall. Families of past complainants filled rows of benches, and officers in uniform sat stiffly, their expressions tight with unease. Sheriff Mason Callahan entered wearing a suit that did not fit him well, his jaw set forward, a faint smirk at the corner of his mouth like he believed the moment belonged to him. He carried with him the arrogance of a man who had been protected his entire life by power handed down rather than earned. He sat beside his attorney and didn't look at anyone else. Nathan was already seated in the front row, silent, still, his presence a steady pressure in the room, though no one but Ortiz knew his title. Tucker sat behind him, fingers locked together, breath shallow. Jada sat beside Pastor Isaiah, who kept one hand gently resting on her shoulder, when the proceedings began. The prosecution called Jada Monroe to the stand first. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the young girl walked forward, slow, careful, her ribs still sore, her eyes still carrying the shock of what she had witnessed. She sat, folded her hands in her lap, and when she was sworn in, her voice was barely above a whisper, but steady. The prosecutor nodded and asked her to describe what she saw. Jada did not dramatize. She did not tremble. She simply told what happened. She described Evelyn's bicycle, the basket, the eggs. She described the way Mace had stumbled out of the truck smelling of alcohol. She described his words, the punch, the sickening sound of skull on iron, the blood pooling. The courtroom did not move. When the video footage recovered from her damaged phone was played, the air shifted. It was not perfect, pixels broken, sound distorted, but the moment of impact was unmistakable. Mace's face, twisted with casual cruelty, Evelyn's body falling, Jada's voice crying out. Someone in the gallery gasped. Mace leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening, but said nothing. when Jada stepped down. Her legs shook. Pastor Isaiah rose without speaking and wrapped his arm around her as she returned to her seat. Nathan watched them quietly. Next came Tucker Malone. He walked to the stand like someone walking to the edge of a ledge, but once seated, something grounded in him. He played the audio recording without introduction. Mace's voice filled the courtroom, loud enough to echo. Her head sounded like a watermelon. Then laughter. Men laughing. Tucker explained how he recorded it, why he did not look away this time. The defense tried to attack his credibility, his past fights, his drinking. Tucker did not deny any of it. "I messed up plenty," he said, voice strong but tired. "But I know right from wrong, and what he did was wrong." The simplicity of the statement cut through the room like a blade. Truth does not need polish when it is real. Then the prosecution called the prior victims, 5 of them. A black father who had been pulled from his car and beaten with a flashlight. A white store clerk whose jaw had been broken during a search for stolen goods that did not exist. A Latina woman who had been slammed to the pavement outside a bar for questioning why an officer touched her. Their stories were quiet, steady, told without vengeance, but with the clarity of people who had waited to breathe for too long. Some cried, some did not. All said the same thing in different words. No one believed us before. The courtroom was silent when the internal systems analyst from the police department took the stand. He wore his uniform, but his hands shook slightly as he was sworn in. He explained how Riley Boone had altered body cam footage over the years, how videos had been mislabeled, cut, and archived under false directory headings. He pulled up timestamps, file markers, metadata entries. He showed how the system had been manipulated so consistently that it could not have been accidental. When asked who ordered the edits, he hesitated. His eyes flicked to the gallery, where Riley's mother sat with her hands pressed to her mouth. "Sheriff Callahan," he said, voice cracking. He told Riley to do it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. A truth long buried was now spoken aloud. Finally. Agent Valeria Ortiz approached the bench with a sealed folder. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated, "Your Honor, this is a collection of 47 reports, complaints, and affidavits previously blocked, delayed, or dismissed from investigation through misconduct within the sheriff's office." She placed the folder before Judge Singh. This case is not about a single act of violence. It is about a system built to hide it. Judge Singh opened the folder and read in silence for a long moment. The room felt suspended, like the world was waiting for her breath. Mace shifted in his seat. His smirk cracked. He stood suddenly, slamming his palm on the defense table. "I am the law in Oakidge," he shouted, voice raw with fury and disbelief, as though the world itself had betrayed him. "You hear me? I am the law." His outburst echoed through the chamber. Judge Singh did not move. She did not blink. Her voice was soft, clear, final. "No," she said, "the law is me, and today, it is not on your side." Mace sat back down slowly, the room now unbearably small around him. His attorney leaned away as if distance might save him. Nathan did not speak. He did not need to. He had not come to threaten or to intimidate or to destroy. He had come to witness. His mother's truth had been spoken aloud in a place where truth could not be buried. And for the first time in many years, Oakidge was not silent. The reckoning had begun. The verdict came down in a room so quiet that even breath felt loud. And when Judge Singh pronounced 25 years without the possibility of parole, Sheriff Mason Callahan's face did not change for a long moment. He simply stared ahead, as though the world had not moved, as though the words did not belong to him. Then something in him buckled, not outwardly, but inward, the way a foundation gives way long before a building falls. He was handcuffed at the table, wrists drawn behind him, and for the first time in his adult life, no badge, no department, no hometown fear protected him. As officers escorted him from the courtroom, a low murmur rose from the gallery. Not celebration, not gloating, but the sigh of people who had been waiting to exhale for generations. Riley Boone did not live to see that moment. 2 nights before sentencing, he had hung himself in a holding cell using a torn bedsheet, leaving behind a single sentence on a scrap of intake paperwork. "I can't face her eyes." His mother found out when a deputy knocked on her door at dawn. She did not speak for hours afterward. The news moved through Oakidge like a cold wind. Some said it was guilt, some said it was fear, but everyone understood the truth. Silence has a cost, and it comes due. When Mace arrived at the federal supermax in Louisiana, he entered a world where his name meant nothing, and his past meant less. The prison was built of concrete, steel, and loneliness, where days stretched without color and nights had no sound except the distant echo of boots on tile. In the exercise yard, no one cared who he had been in Oakidge. They only cared about the way he carried himself, the defiance still in his jaw. There was a moment, a single spark, when a group of inmates saw that pride and recognized it for what it was: entitlement without power. The fight happened in silence, no shouting, no threats, just 3 swift blows, a boot to the ribs, a sharp crack, then another. He was left on the concrete, breathing shallow, 3 ribs broken, the same number Evelyn had shattered when she fell at the flea market. There was a symmetry in it that no one spoke aloud. Justice has a strange way of circling back in Oakidge. The police department did not collapse loudly. It folded in on itself like old paper. Quietly, tired. 6 officers were fired for misconduct, each with their own ledger of ignored complaints. 2 were indicted. Patrol schedules thinned. The station doors did not slam shut, but they no longer carried the same weight. The town, for the first time in years, walked its streets without lowering its eyes. But freedom does not arrive without consequence. The market where Evelyn fell had become a gathering place for grief and anger. People brought candles, photographs, handwritten notes. Some cried, some held their silence like a prayer. And when the news of the sentencing spread, something in the town ignited, not rage, but release. A crowd formed that evening, starting with 10 people, then 50, then hundreds. Pastor Isaiah stepped onto the courthouse steps, lit a single candle, and began to walk. The march grew behind him, slow and steady, like a river finding its path. Voices joined in low chorus, not shouting demands, but singing an old hymn that had survived too many winters to be forgotten. But not everything was peaceful. The old red brick police station burned 3 nights later, flames swallowing the roof and filling the sky with smoke. No one claimed responsibility. No one confessed. Some said it was anger. Some said it was cleansing. Some said it was simply time. By morning, the building was gone, and the only thing left standing was the flagpole in front, charred black but still upright, through all of this. Nathan did not stand at the center. He moved through town quietly, as he always had. He did not speak at press conferences. He did not give interviews. He sat beside his mother each day, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. Lila monitored Evelyn with the steady patience of someone who had learned to believe in small returns. Sometimes Evelyn's fingers twitched. Sometimes her eyes fluttered. Healing is not dramatic. It is a long road walked steadily. And Nathan understood roads like that. On the morning after the march, Jada stood on the church steps, looking out at the town she had once feared. She held her cracked phone in her hand, the screen repaired enough to work, but still spiderwebbed with damage. She could have replaced it. People had offered. But she kept it the way it was, a reminder. Truth does not need to be perfect. It just needs to survive. And somewhere inside a cell in Louisiana, Sheriff Mason Callahan lay on his back, staring at a ceiling that did not care who he was. He would live a long time with nothing but his own thoughts. And that was the true sentence. Not the years, not the concrete, not the confinement, the silence. In Oakidge. Silence was finally broken. The change did not arrive all at once, not in a single headline or a single speech, but in the slow rising tide of attention that could no longer be diverted or buried. The footage Jada had recorded went online 2 days after the sentencing, shared first by one local page, then another, then lifted by a civil rights group in Atlanta, and within hours, the story had caught fire across the country. People watched a 74-year-old woman, thin and kind, standing next to her bicycle, and they watched a sheriff nearly twice her size strike her down as though she were nothing. There was no political argument to be made about what the eyes could see. There was no rhetoric strong enough to justify it. And suddenly, Evelyn Harper's name was in every living room, every church bulletin, every radio segment between morning weather reports. It was not the violence alone that caught the nation. Violence was something America had learned to look away from. It was the dignity she carried, even unconscious. The way her story unfolded not with revenge, but with truth. Legislators in state houses from Georgia to Illinois began drafting what the press soon called the Evelyn Act, a law that restricted the use of force against anyone over the age of 65, making such incidents automatically subject to federal review. Some critics argued it was unnecessary. Some said it was emotional overreach. But when Evelyn's son, Nathan, appeared in Washington, standing not in uniform nor behind rank, but in quiet civilian clothes, and told the committee the elderly should not need to earn gentleness, the room fell silent. The bill passed in 47 states in just under 7 months, the kind of speed usually reserved only for matters that threatened money or power. Yet here, it was passed because the country recognized itself in the story of an old woman who had asked for nothing but to be left in peace. And while the lawmakers argued, ordinary people moved. The hashtag that carried her name spread faster than any political debate. Hashtag Say Her Name appeared in 1.2 million videos in 3 weeks. But beyond screens, something more real occurred. In church basements, gymnasiums, firehouses, and city parks, officers, young, old, tired, hardened, sat through new training sessions on racial bias and de-escalation. Some resisted. Some rolled their eyes, but others listened. And listening has a way of planting seeds that grow later, quietly, sometimes where no one expects. Pastor Isaiah continued his marches, soft-footed, candle-lit, mournful, determined, not loud, not violent, but consistent. The town followed him because he did not ask them to believe in change. He asked them only to believe in each other again, and they did. The ones who had stood up paid their own costs. Jada Monroe, barely 16, suddenly found her name in news articles, her face in interviews she never asked for. Cameras frightened her more than any courtroom ever had. Her voice trembled sometimes, but she spoke when she chose to, and she spoke plainly. When a Boston reporter asked her why she recorded, she answered, "Because she once fed me soup when I was hungry." And I remembered. That clip traveled farther than the footage of the blow. People understood that kind of truth. Harvard University reached out before she even finished her junior year of high school, offering a full scholarship to study social advocacy. But she did not talk about it. She still sat in the choir loft some evenings, clutching her cracked phone like a memory she refused to smooth over. Tucker Malone took a different path. He opened a small repair garage in the old feed store lot, hanging a cardboard sign that read, "No charge if you can't afford it." At first, people thought it was foolish, but then a single mother came with a broken starter, and Tucker fixed it with the skill of someone who had nothing but his hands to offer the world. And when she tried to pay him, he shook his head. Word spread. A pastor brought a church van, a teacher brought her old Honda, A neighbor brought a tractor. Tucker worked quietly, sleeves rolled, eyes clear. The guilt he once carried slowly replaced by purpose. Some wounds don't heal by forgetting. They heal by building something new in the open. Nathan did not stay in the center of the attention. He had returned to his team after his mother stabilized, leaving as quietly as he had arrived. He was seen only once in those months afterward, standing in a Senate hallway after the Evelyn Act passed, offering no speech, giving no interviews, only placing one hand over the photograph of his mother on the bill signing table before turning and walking away. Those who recognized him did not call out. And Evelyn, still recovering, still carrying the long, slow repair of body and mind, did not ask for any of it. She had never wanted a movement. She had only wanted to live her days quietly, teaching children to read on her porch, growing tomatoes in the red Georgia soil, humming to herself in the late afternoon sun. But sometimes history does not ask permission. It arrives, and something ordinary becomes the beginning of something larger. The wave had begun, and the world was already changing. 6 months later, the world had moved on in headlines. But the story had never really been about headlines. Oakidge changed in ways that were small to the eye but enormous to the heart. The flea market still ran every Saturday, though the corner where Evelyn fell was marked now by a simple wooden bench with no plaque, no name, just a quiet place where people sometimes sat and remembered. The police station had been rebuilt in a smaller building, its walls unadorned, its authority no longer unquestioned but earned day by day. The town walked slower, looked longer at one another, spoke more gently, yet life itself, the ordinary, unremarkable kind, continued as if healing happened not in grand gestures, but in the way morning follows night without being asked. General Harper returned home in late spring, walking with careful steps, her balance still cautious, her strength recovering like the slow unfurling of a leaf after winter. Her hair had grown thinner, her speech a bit softer, but her eyes remained unchanged, sharp, kind, unbroken. She refused every interview request, every award, every invitation to stand on a stage. She had not fought to be seen. She had fought simply to live, and now she wanted only to return to the life she knew. So she moved her rocking chair back to her porch, the one with peeling white paint and the old wind chimes that sang on breezy afternoons. And she began to teach again. Children from the neighborhood came in 2s and 4s, sitting on the steps with dog-eared paperbacks or borrowed notebooks, learning the way Evelyn had always taught, slowly, patiently, with the kind of love that does not draw attention to itself. Some were too shy to speak at first. Some had lost confidence after years of being told they were behind. Evelyn never hurried them. She would say, "We read to remember who we are," and the children would look at her as though she were telling them something far larger than words on a page. Nathan visited quietly, never arriving with ceremony, never wearing a uniform, always in the same faded t-shirt as though leaving the weight of the world at the gate. He would stand beneath the oak tree, watching his mother read with the children. And each time, something in his chest eased. He had seen war held in men's eyes, seen ambition burn countries to ash, seen grief sharpen into vengeance. But here, on this porch, with children spelling out simple sentences, he saw something stronger than power. He saw endurance. He saw peace earned rather than granted. When the children left each day, Evelyn would wave to them, then sit back in her chair, letting her fingers rest against the armrest the way one does after a long journey that has finally come to stillness. One evening, as the orange light of sunset washed across the front steps, Nathan sat beside her. No words were exchanged for a while. They simply listened, to the breeze, to the cicadas beginning their song, to the slow rhythm of a town remembering how to breathe. Then Evelyn turned to him with a small, tired smile. "You didn't need vengeance," she said. "You needed to live right." Nathan's voice was low, steady. "I thought I came home to fight," he said, "but I think I came home to listen." Evelyn nodded gently. "Justice does not always roar," she said. "Sometimes it just waits for someone to speak plainly." They sat that way for a long time. Two figures bound by love stronger than any history elsewhere. The echoes of what happened in Oakidge continued unfolding in quiet ways. Jada prepared for her move to Harvard, though she still stopped by the porch some evenings, leaning against the railing with her cracked phone in her hand, speaking softly with Evelyn about school, about courage, about choosing kindness, even when the world does not. Tucker's garage stayed busy, his hands always covered in grease, his smile faint but real now, carrying the calm of someone who had finally stepped out from the shadow of fear. Pastor Isaiah continued his community gatherings, though they no longer felt like protests. They felt like neighbors meeting again for the first time in years. Agent Ortiz received a commendation she did not intend to accept. Judge Singh continued her work, one case at a time, with the same quiet resolve, and Sheriff Mason Callahan remained in his cell, his world small now, stripped of authority, stripped of noise, stripped of excuse. He was not forgotten, but he was no longer feared. That, perhaps, was the truest consequence. The camera of life, if such a thing existed, would have pulled back slowly then, from the porch, from the children laughing, from the old bicycle leaning against the rail, from the town healing in patient silence. The story did not end in fire or fury. It ended here, in the soft rustle of pages turning, in the steady rhythm of footsteps on wooden steps, in the gentle truth that justice, when it finally comes, does not need to shout, it simply stays. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments.